What's up, everybody? Citizen Kimberly here. Welcome back to the channel, and now it's time for an episode of Netflix and Shop, where we slice open and dissect the featured film. Today's feature we're going to be discussing is a 2015 international film, a horror, a thriller. Oh, it's dark in the noir space. So we are going to be discussing Honeymoon, aka Luna de Miel. So the story starts off, and immediately we're looking at a gentleman, and he's getting ready for the day. He's putting on his suit and his tie, and then we're going to scroll on over to where we see an attractive young lady. She's putting her hair in a ponytail, and she's making sure that everything is perfectly in place. Then we see the two kind of doing what they need to be doing before they're getting ready to walk out of the door. At this point, we're looking at the gentleman, and he's looking at his clock, and the young lady is putting on her shoes, and all of a sudden we see that the gentleman is actually waiting and timing to where he can actually see and coincidentally bump into this young lady while she is getting her exercise on. So we kind of follow the gentleman as he is trying to place himself at the appropriate time, at the appropriate place where he can bump into this young lady. She is just kind of, we can see her, she's kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of chick, you know, she's really into her exercise routine. He tries to time his placement at this particular grocery store that she's going to, kind of like a convenience store situation that they have going on. You know, you can see that he's so desperate, and he tries while the girl is in there, and she kind of bumps into one of her colleagues or friends or whatever, and they're having this conversation, and he's like, darn it. You can tell he's just like, So, and at this point, you know, the story kind of has this music going on in the background, like it's this really cute love story or something like that. You're thinking it's kind of like the skippity-doo-dah music that's going on. You know, kind of like in one of those romantic comedies where the guy gets the girl at the end. Anyway, so one day while he's at this grocery store or convenience store, he sees the girl, and he's like, yes, but she gets on the telephone and she's not paying him any kind of attention. So he buys whatever it is that she's going to purchase beforehand, and she figures it out after she gets off the phone and tries to pay. And the clerk is like, oh, it's already been paid for. So of course, as a nice person, she runs behind him and is like, oh, thank you, but you didn't have to do that. And he's all like, oh no, it's no problem, I wanted to. And she's like, oh, well, thank you. And she gives him her name. I think her name is Isabel. She doesn't even really care about his name, and his name is George. So we still follow them. This is kind of a long sort of introduction to these two characters, Isabel and George. So we kind of follow them, and George is still stalking her, but stalking her in kind of one of those crush ways. You know, in those romantic comedies where the guy is just really enamored with this particular girl, and he is stalking her, but not in a creepy way quite yet. So one day George is trying to get his exercise on. So we are quite aware that George has no idea, you know, what it's like to jog, but he's going to do it anyway because he really wants to get to this young lady. So he's jogging behind her, and she's jogging, and he spies her running across the street, and he sees her kind of leap into the arms of this man, full leg wrap around and everything. And of course, the disappointment washes over George, and it's a really sad thing. However, the man takes a note of George, and you can see that there's kind of this stare down. And George is like, you know, he's weirded out because he can't believe that this guy is actually staring at him. So time goes on, and the next couple of scenes, we kind of see George getting these orders, and George is affluent. Like his apartment is set up. He's got coins. He's got money for days. He's got beautiful furniture and a beautiful house or apartment. I do believe it's a house situation where he owns all of the floors. So it's this huge house setup and it's beautifully decorated and he has all of these amenities and he dresses well and he's actually handsome. In my opinion, I thought George was handsome. So George is getting these orders and he tries on this collar that he's gotten in the mail. This collar is, of course, an electric collar. We see him testing the collar out on himself, adjusting the levels of electricity that's supposed to be charged into this collar. He shocks himself out. It's kind of a big deal. So he keeps getting orders, and the next thing we see is George by his car, and he's timed it perfectly to where he can bump into Isabel. And of course there's an issue, so when Isabel sees him, she's like, oh my gosh, George, like, what's the problem? He's like, oh, I have a flat tire. Can you help me? Can you get the, whatever it is he told her. He told her to get something from the trunk. So of course she gets it, and boom, Isabel is snatched because George has injected her with some sort of concoction that knocks her right out. So George stuffs her in the car, and there's just dramatic music that goes on. And the next thing you know, Isabel is strapped to a wheelchair, and she has awoken. Now, here's where it gets ridiculous, because Isabel is screaming for her life, continuously screaming like she has no sense. She is not... In my opinion, at this point, it's like not the characteristic of a person who is aware that they are in trouble. Now, while she's screaming, George is looking at her with this very calm and quiet face. And he's just kind of like, I need to talk to you. There's something that we need to talk about. And she's just losing her mind. She's like, I'm going to kill you. You really suck. You're sick. Blah, blah, blah. And of course, George cannot communicate with her at this point, so he knocks her out again. Several flashes later, of course, Isabel is dreaming of this dude that she wrapped her legs around and is so enamored by. We find out that this dude is her husband. She's having these flashes of their romantic times together, and that's all that she can think about. Now, when she awakens, of course, George is there and she has no sense and she is still screaming and all of this just bloody, incoherent. She won't even listen to George. And I'm thinking, why can't you just play it cool? Because George is playing it cool, and in a situation as such where she's strapped to a chair and she can't move, she should at least listen to what her captor has to say. At this point, I'm like, I just don't like this girl, because she is getting on my nerves. I would like to see her at least act with some sense so I can root for her. So it is at this point where Isabel is not making any sense and I am totally hating her character. And George, he seems like he is completely freaked out. Like, what have I done? And, what have I gotten myself into? But he's going to follow through. So he brings her, and of course, they are in this disheveled basement kind of setup that's going on that he's placed her in. And I'm also wondering, I'm like, oh my gosh, if he likes this girl so much, why would he put her in these squalorly settings? But we kind of figure out later on that there's absolutely, he kind of has no choice because this girl is erratic. So onward we go. So George is bringing Isabel these gourmet meals. She's still, of course, strapped to the chair. And she's refusing to eat. And George is like, you have to eat. And she just really she's just not trying to hear it. George is like, look, you haven't eaten for 2 days. Can you please just take a couple of bites of this? I made it myself. And it's really sad because, these meals are gourmet. He's serving them on this little tray, the silver tray, and he's trying to feed her. Isabel then asks, can she use the bathroom? And he places the collar on her. And, I'm thinking, like, Isabel, don't try it. just don't do it, girl. But of course, you know, she goes to the bathroom and she's walking, and she uses the bathroom, and he has the little remote control to this collar, and she tries to leap at him, but of course she's snatched. He shocks her and she's out like a light. When she awakens, George has put on this wedding gown and put her makeup on, and she's got the veil going on, and really it's not an attractive gown. The gown is not cute. George also has on his tuxedo. He looks great, and he is playing both the part of the priest and the groom, and Isabel is still sobbing. She's she's doing the ugly cry. She's gasping for air, and at this point I'm like, Isabel, you know, girl, he's trying to be, it's like, what are you gonna do in a situation like this? Play along. Everybody knows, and I think that if you were captured and the result would be the same, you're gonna die trying, or you're gonna sit there and you're just going to die. I would try to at least win my captor's trust and then get away, because either way you're kind of screwed, right? But Isabel just isn't making any sense. So, or she's not thinking to, I guess her character is not written logically at this point. So Isabel is, they're both kneeling there, and George is like, do you take this man's hand in total matrimony? And she won't say anything, and he kind of snatches her by the back of the head. This is the first inkling of George's kind of roughness and sadisticness, because he really wants to make her answer, and finally she does. So it's and he puts the wedding ring on her. He takes her wedding ring off and kind of chucks it, he flushes it down the toilet. It wasn't really a cute ring anyway. So at this point, Isabel is still, you know, she's just not doing very well. But she does at some point manage to eat one of these gourmet meals that George brings down to her. She kind of starts having this conversation with him. And at this point I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, maybe she is getting smart. Maybe she's got it. But then she spits the food right in George's face, and you can tell that he's taken aback, because he was really getting into this conversation that they were having. So when she does it, it's weird, because she opens her mouth again and expects for George to feed her some more food. Instead, George's sadistic side sort of escalates, and when it does escalate, he decides to spray some acid into her mouth. Now he's got her set up like her mouth is held in place with these metal brackets, and he sprays this acid inside, and she's and he's like, you can spit all you want now. And so then he sprinkles it in there to neutralize the acid, and he's looking all around, and there's foam coming out. Now this is where the film gets really interesting, because they're kind of doing it up with these kind of gnarly, gory scenes. That's one thing that surprised me. I didn't expect for that sort of thing to come out in this film, but we'll get to my expectations later. So after he neutralizes the acid in her mouth, we kind of flash a little bit later, and we see that he is giving her medication. He's saying her wounds have healed nicely and everything's gonna be okay. She's kind of sitting there like, eee, and I'm like, girl, you just really, why would you do that? And then why would you expect him to feed you more food after you spit the food in his face? So there are a couple of more scenes sort of akin to what I've previously described. Isabel kind of warms up to George, then she takes it away. George's attitude escalates, and then he does something sadistic to her. One of the more sadistic scenes that happen in this movie is when George decides to remove the skin from Isabel's fingers. Now, this is nasty, but I have to say again that I thought it was kind of cool the way that they do it. And they also include some really creepy music in the background. So in order not to give away the ending of the film, I will leave you with this one piece of information. There is a scene where Isabel is having this dream of her former husband. Now, in the dream, it's not really a dream, it's more like a flashback, but it's more like her dream. She is thinking of one of their romantic interludes, but really we can see that her husband is staring off and kind of distant. And at this point, when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, does this man really doesn't like her? It's really weird. And she is just like, oh, I miss you, I love you, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, look, I'm in trouble. And, I owe this money. And that's a little clue into sort of what happens later on in this film and how everybody's kind of connected and so on and so forth. So I'm going to leave it at that without giving away a bit too much about this film. And now I'm going to go straight into my thoughts on the film. So The Honeymoon is about an hour and 49 minutes or an hour and 40 minutes. It is in Spanish, it is subtitled, and you'll have to read it. But I will say the description that's given on Netflix is a bit misleading. I was under the assumption that this movie was about two people just getting endlessly tortured. Instead, I was surprised upon watching the film that it actually had more of a storyline and a plot than I expected it to. Now, granted, one thing that I should make you aware of is that the first 30 minutes of the film are a little bit slow, they are a little bit misleading, and they are almost silent. So I wouldn't recommend being turned off because it is silent. The action does pick up after the first 30 minutes when Isabel gets snatched. I'm not going to say that this film is extremely smart, but I will say that I was pleasantly surprised at the direction in which the film took. I was also really surprised at the fact that it was a little bit more creative with the gore scenes, and it was a little bit more surprising with the torture scenes than I thought that it would be. And that is, to me, that is a shocker. The movie itself is a little bit disturbing. There are some things that are a little bit unsettling that are placed inside of the film, so I would not recommend it if you are a person that is triggered by anything that would be considered triggering, especially when it comes to abduction films and session films. And that's where I'm going to leave that description. So you take that how you might want to take it. But as for the writing, I'm not going to say that the writing was horrible, because it wasn't. The only thing that I was really annoyed with was Isabel's character. I felt like she was perhaps written a little bit unintelligent. I would have liked to see a stronger female character, at least initially, kind of come out or develop. And I will say that eventually she does make you root for her. She does work for the rooting, and that also was surprising because she just really, she was on my nerves. If you can get past her and her kind of obnoxious screaming and unintelligent and illegible back and forthness, then you can definitely maybe appreciate how she kind of emerges into a stronger female character later on. As for George, I feel like there wasn't really too much that could be written for him. I do feel like the actor who played George was really good. And, one thing that I have to add is the kind of ironic thing that I felt was interjected into the film was that George was actually a handsome doctor versus Isabel's husband, who was kind of a loser, and he wasn't even that cute. I thought that was really interesting. And one of my thoughts that I forgot to previously kind of interject is, I don't know why George would be so obsessed over Isabel when he's got all of these things going on for him. He's a handsome doctor, he's living quite well, and I'm like, why are there no other ladies in his vision that he can perhaps muster up the courage to talk to instead of focusing on Isabel, who kind of seems like she's in outer space and thinks that everything is shiny in a bad way. But as far as the film goes, back to the film. As far as the film goes, it wasn't too bad. If you're into gore, then you'll like it. If you're into thrillers, you could like it. But if you're into a film that serves action one after the other, this may not be the film for you because it starts off very slow, and that may kind of deter the viewer at first. But I'm going to say if you're into all of the things that I previously described, then you'll probably like it. For me, it certainly was surprising, and I kind of avoided watching this film for the longest time due to what I thought the film was about. I really am not into just mindless, torture films. At least give me a story. And surprisingly, The Honeymoon did that. So, if you're into films that kind of give you a little bit of a surprise, if you're into films that kind of serve up a little bit of gore, if you're into films that have a surprise ending, because there is kind of a surprise gory ending, which I felt was appropriate, and I was really excited because Isabel showed that she was a very strong female character, and to be completely honest, I was a little sad for George. But if you're into films that do all of what I've just listed, then you'll definitely like The Honeymoon, La Luna de Miel, and that is going to do it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. Let me know if you've seen this film before. Leave it in the comments down below, or let me know if you've seen some sort of film that is comparable to that, and maybe I'll check it out because that would be cool. And as always, until next time, if you're into it, watch it.